The commission will come to order. Good afternoon. This is the May 3rd, 2012 meeting of the National Capital Planning Commission. Welcome, and if you would all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the information for all who are here, this meeting is being live streamed on the web on the ncpc.gov website. So all remarks are for the world to see. Noting the presence of a quorum, would like to call the meeting to order, and without objection, we'll proceed along the lines of the agenda that's been publicly advertised. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman, and I have just one item. The Interagency Security Task Force, which NCPC works hand in glove with many agencies and the Department of Homeland Security and folks. We met on April the 12th to discuss the ongoing Federal Triangle Precinct Security Study. The study is investigating ways to improve perimeter security throughout this historically significant precinct, basically from the FCC building to the Department of Commerce, while also enhancing the public realm. Based on the direction of the task force, staff is preparing the draft report and recommendations, and the task force expects to reconvene in June to refine the draft report, and a final document is anticipated later this fall. And Bill Dowd is doing a great deal of the work from our staff perspective. Agenda item number 2 is report of the Executive Director, Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just 2 announcements to make that might be of interest to the general public. On May 17th, NCPC is sponsoring a forum on sustainable planning at defense installations. The Department of Defense has developed comprehensive master planning and updated construction and operation standards to plan, build, and operate more energy efficient and environmentally sustainable facilities that support its mission and also responds to the concerns of host communities. This program will feature a keynote by Dr. Dorothy Robine, who is the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment. We'll also feature a panel discussion and an in-depth presentation of the soon-to-be-released update to the Unified Facilities Criteria. The May 17th event is at 9 a.m. to noon at George Mason University's Arlington campus in Founders Hall, and we hope that the commissioners would have the time to attend the meeting. I know DoD facilities are a very important part of what we review as a commission, and I think this would be a very good presentation for all of us to hear. You'll also find a handout at your desk. In addition, the Trust for the National Mall is sponsoring the National Mall Design Competition to develop concept proposals for Constitution Gardens, the Washington Monument Grounds at Sylvan Theater, and Union Square. The Trust is actually announcing the competition winning designs right as I'm speaking, so we'll find out soon who won the competition. We are also co-sponsoring an event on May 31st at 6:30 p.m. at the National Building Museum, where representatives from the 3 winning design teams will present their visions for transforming these sites on the National Mall. And we are co-sponsoring this with the Trust for the National Mall and the National Building Museum. That concludes my report. There's also a written copy of my report in their package.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Questions or comments for Mr. Costa? Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing to report this month.
Thank you. And then agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar, and we have 3 items on the consent calendar. Let's read them into the record first. Item 4A is the installation of Sprint communication antennas and rooftop equipment on Building 220 at the Washington Navy Yard. 4B is the Wounded Warrior Transition Lodge at Naval Support Activity Bethesda. And 4C is the District of Columbia's CIP for fiscal years 2013 to 2018. It has been moved, and I'm sure there is a second. It's been moved and seconded that the 3 items on the consent calendar be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The consent calendar is approved. Moving to the action items, we have 2 action items. Agenda item 5A is perimeter security and site improvements at the Albert Bryan U.S. Courthouse in Alexandria. We have Mr. Hart. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Commission. The project before you today is perimeter security and site improvements for the Albert V. Bryan United States Courthouse, which is located in Alexandria, Virginia. This project was submitted by the General Services Administration for preliminary and final site development review. Here is the site context for the courthouse. The courthouse is located in the Carlisle District, which is a mixed-use development in Alexandria. That development is that district is south of the King Street Metro Rail Station and the Masonic Temple. It is east of the Eisenhower Metro Rail Station, and the Alexandria National Cemetery is to the east of the district. This Carlisle district is a special district in Alexandria, and all of the roads and public spaces in the district are under the ownership and management of a group called the Carlisle Community Council, and this council is made up of landowners in the Carlisle district. This is a different situation than most of Alexandria, which the city of Alexandria has the ownership and management of the roads and open spaces. What this means is that GSA would need the approval of the Carlisle Community Council to be able to complete the project that's before you. Okay, the immediate context around the building. Again, this is the courthouse building that we're speaking of. To the north of the site is the Courthouse Square South, which is a street that is on one side of the Courthouse Square, which is a park that's to the north of the building. Jamison Avenue is to the west, and Elizabeth Lane is to the east. This building is a block or so to the west of the Patent and Trademark Office complex, which you see outlined, indicated on this slide. To the south of the site are office buildings and parking garages, as well as to the east. There is an alley that separates these buildings that are south of the site from the courthouse itself. And then to the north are a residential condo building, which is in the Carlisle Towers, as well as the Westin Alexandria Hotel. This building was approved by the Commission in 1991 and constructed in the mid-1990s. At the time of NCPC's review and approval, there was no perimeter security associated with the project. Temporary perimeter security was installed in the early 2000s in response to the September 11th events, the terrorist attack, as well as the court being designated as the main location for the trials for suspected terrorists. Now we'll get to the the site itself. And the images that you see are the existing site, Jamison Avenue on the left-hand side, Courthouse Square South, and Elizabeth Lane, the roads that abut the courthouse. In Jamison Avenue, currently there is a sidewalk with street trees, curb, and then you see here, as well as here, are the temporary Jersey barriers that were put in place in the early 2000s. This actually means that a portion of the road, Jamison Avenue, is not available for the public to use. There is a parking area for official law enforcement vehicles on the outside of the Jersey barriers. And so that's Jameson Avenue. In front of the building, this is the main entrance of the courthouse for pedestrians. This road, which is Courthouse South, is actually closed currently. There are Jersey barriers on either side. It's a fairly short road. There are Jersey barriers on either side of it. There's also a Jersey barrier here in the courthouse square. And then you'll notice there are some planters in front of the building currently. Now moving to Elizabeth Lane, this is the courthouse on the right portion of the image. And you'll see the temporary the Jersey barriers along the curb along Elizabeth Lane, the length of the building. There are some existing street trees, and actually each of these images, the street trees along Elizabeth Lane will actually be removed because they're in fairly poor condition. You'll notice that these are fairly small as well. These will be removed and new landscaping will be planted. And then along Jameson Avenue, these trees are actually fairly mature and are doing well, and the landscape area will be expanded, and I'll show that in a moment. So for perimeter security planning, the main guiding document is the National Capital Urban Design and Security Plan, and you'll see three of the objectives summarized here. They are to balance physical perimeter security with the vitality of the public realm, that there is a multifaceted approach to security. It's using both physical security as well as other things like operational issues as well. There is an acceptable reasonable risk for buildings located in an urban setting, and understanding that. The main policy, as I spoke of at the last commission meeting about the Commerce Building, there's a similar issue about the impacting public space. For existing buildings in urban areas, the perimeter security barriers should be located within the building yard when the size of the yard is greater than or equal to 20 feet. And if the building yard is less than 20 feet, the barriers may be located in public space. And now I'll go through the security that's being proposed before you. The elements are bollards, which are 4 feet clearance between them. There are also some retractable bollards that are proposed, and I'll go in this in a little bit more detail in a minute. There are hardened garden walls along the Jameson Avenue and Courthouse Square South side of the building, and along Elizabeth Lane there's a cable stay barrier system, and I'll explain why there's some difference between the hardened garden walls and the cable stay barrier system. This is the property line in yellow, and some of this property line is within that. Some of the property line is 20 feet is less than 20 feet, and most of actually the property line is less than 20 feet from the building, and therefore a lot of the perimeter security is outside of that 20-foot area in the public space. This line shown here, the darker line, is actually showing the 20-foot distance from the building. You'll note that the perimeter security, the red line, is actually within the blue line fairly significantly around the building, except for really Courthouse Square, which is again in the public realm. So for Jameson Avenue, this is just a detailed image showing the vehicle entry. GSA is proposing to install bollards and hardened garden fence along the length of Jameson Avenue. Those are the security elements. The site improvements are to increase the sidewalk area. And you saw in an earlier photograph that the sidewalk was actually adjacent to the building. And GSA is proposing to take out that sidewalk and add in landscaping here and also down here, and move the sidewalk out to the street, really taking over a portion of the street itself. This is really to allow the pedestrian way, the sidewalk, the pedestrian movement to be outside of the perimeter security, which is right at the edge of the garden wall, the landscaping that's shown here. The other piece of this is that there was a existing official vehicle parking area that was along Jameson Avenue. That's actually being moved to Elizabeth Lane, and I'll show that in an upcoming slide. This is Jameson Avenue perspective, looking west along Jameson Avenue, looking down towards that vehicle entrance that you saw a little earlier. This is the garden wall, and it steps down to the west. And there's a landscaped area. These are existing trees. They will remain. The sidewalk that's here is actually going to be demolished and removed, and then a new sidewalk will be in its place. And then the travel lanes will stay here. And I failed to mention in the previous slide that currently there's just two travel lanes on Jameson Avenue, and GSA is adding another travel lane, and that's because they are removing the parking area for the official law enforcement vehicles and moving that parking area to Elizabeth Lane. Courthouse Square South, perimeter security is to install a garden wall and bollards along the north area here. Also looking to open up Courthouse Square, the road itself, to one-way traffic. That one-way traffic would move to the east. In order to do that, GSA is also proposing to have retractable bollards in the street right-of-way itself, in the street itself, so here and here. These retractable bollards would actually be in the down position normally, and on during heightened security times, the bollards would be raised, but that would be infrequently during the year. Side improvements include creating a plaza. This image down here is a detail of that front entrance. Creating a plaza in front of the building for pedestrian movement. Also, you see this little piece here, which is actually a connection, raised pedestrian connection between the Courthouse Square and the building, and so that would be an at-grade connection to the square to the north. This is also called a speed table because it would help to reduce the speeds as people are driving along Courthouse Square South. They'd have to go up and down like a speed bump. Adding these planting areas, you saw that there were some images earlier that there were some trees there. These trees would be removed and new trees would be in their place, and then the garden wall would be installed on the outside of that. And then this is an image showing the Courthouse Square South entrance here, and then the perimeter security along the road. Along Elizabeth Lane, GSA is proposing to install a cable stay barrier system as well as bollards. The bollards are generally around the site. Bollards are used where pedestrians are crossing either at crosswalks or entering the building. There is one main entrance for employees down here, and then this is the main entrance for the building. And the cable stay barrier system is located along the edge of the sidewalk here. It's actually 3 feet off of the curb to allow for cars that are parking to be able to open their doors. Site improvements include the replacement and protection of the street trees along Elizabeth Lane. GSA is proposing to do a couple of things to help protect and promote the growth of the trees. One is there's a light line that's located here on this image. This line is actually showing where the structural soil will be installed. So from here to the curb, all of this area is structural soil, and that would be help to enhance the tree pits and enhance the tree growth along Elizabeth Lane. And the reason that there's a cable stay barrier system here, as opposed to having the hardened garden wall. The garden wall itself needs the footer for it is just one large footer for the entire garden wall area. For these systems, the system here, the footer is actually much smaller, and again, it will help to allow the tree growth, promote the tree growth as well. Evaluation criteria, the National Capital Urban Design and Security Plan, objectives and policies. GSA is proposing barriers that are within the building yard when the site of the yard is greater than or equal to 20 feet, which is in line with what the security plan says. And GSA is proposing barriers that are located outside, that are located in the public space when the building yard is less than the 20 feet. And this is also in line with the plan. For coordination, GSA has worked diligently with the Carlisle Community Council, the City of Alexandria, the Carlisle Design Review Board, as well as the tenants, the marshals, as well as the U.S. District Courts, and NCPC staff on developing a perimeter security solution for the urban site that balances pedestrian movement as well as with the building security. You will see letters from the agencies and organizations here that are in the staff report at the end of the report, just for your review. And with that, the Commission approves the preliminary and final site development plans for site improvements and perimeter security at the Bryan United States Courthouse, and commends GSA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the U.S. District Court for working with the Carlisle Community Council and the City of Alexandria in developing a design that is consistent with NCPC's National Capital Urban Design and Security Plan, is well integrated into the urban fabric, improves the alignment of local streets, reopens an existing street to the public while providing an appropriate level of security for the courthouse employees. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. We have a public, one person signed up to provide public comment. Before we do that, are there questions for Mr. Hart? We also have GSA representatives here, AECOM and others.
Mr. Chairman, one of my common questions about this, the ballots, any effort, any possibility we can get some furniture, some functional stuff, just not just ballots, but something that maybe some of those employees and residents can use to sit down on and maybe enjoy all those trees that are going to grow up around them at some point. I know it may be narrow, so.
No, that's fine. Actually, can you show that again, please, for a second? There are some there are some benches and things actually in the courthouse square. The courthouse square itself, the park, has actually a number of benches. I actually visited there, and there were a number of people sitting out there. So it actually is used now. And along Elizabeth Lane, there are some benches that are actually incorporated into the building itself. So they are, and I think one of the images may actually show where that is. And I can pass that information on to GSA.
Okay. I'm familiar with the area.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was there about maybe a month ago, and I'm there with frequency, actually. But my question, again, is whether or not some of the ballots could be replaced with some furniture that could allow for more seating, not just for the government folk, but there are a lot of residents, a huge residential complex there that it may benefit, I don't know. But I'd like to just raise it as a question. Maybe it can be dealt with, maybe it can be done, I don't know.
Yeah, I know GSA is here. Maybe they'd like to answer the question about.
I'll introduce
Sure.
the project team. This was sort of a darling project for OPDQ because it had been left to founder for a while. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Pete Rizzo is on our staff and has been noted for his rather tenacious attention to this project. Peter, you want to address the width of the street and all of that?
My name is Peter Rizzo. I'm a senior urban planner with GSA in the National Capital Region. Speaking to your question about the street furniture, we've worked very, very closely with the judges, the marshals, the community members, as well as the City of Alexandria, and perhaps, Katie, you can speak to that as well, in trying to make sure that this particular project works well with the community, respects and responds to the large condo facility across the street, as well as the hotel and other retail and office space on site. The park is really the centerpiece of this project. It's not owned by GSA, but I understand that the Carlisle Community Council, working with the City of Alexandria, will be investing in that park, and it will be a rallying point in the community itself. There are benches incorporated on the the Elizabeth Lane side of the building, and on the Jameson Avenue side, we don't have any benches in there, and we did look at that issue during the Carlisle Design Review Board meeting. A resident spoke up and requested that we look into that, and we did. We actually met afterwards with that gentleman, and we didn't feel that it would be appropriate, given the width of the street, or the sidewalk rather, the necessary standoff from the building itself, and just the environment. It's actually quite a steep slope and would be somewhat uncomfortable to sit there. So instead, we'll encourage a very healthy public realm on that side so that it's a nice pedestrian experience, and hopefully encourage folks to use that park, which is really a great asset. There's a fountain there and green space and what have you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Ms. Greenwood.
I think you may have lost me a little bit with regards to the retractable bollards in the front entrance of the building. How many retractable bollards are planned versus permanent bollards,
that's
and
fine.
exactly where do they lie?
There are 4. They're actually in the street itself, and 4 on this side. So they're on either side of this. That's it.
So they'll
Those-
come up to block vehicular
vehicles.
traffic?
Yes, that's
Okay.
it. The other ones are all are stationary bollards.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Let me call on Katie North. Katie is with the City of Alexandria to provide public comment, and Ms. North, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I am Katie North, a planner with the City of Alexandria Planning Department, and I'm here today to offer the city's support for the proposed security and site improvements at the A.V. Bryan Courthouse in the Carlisle neighborhood of Alexandria. GSA has been working closely with the city over the last year to develop an appropriate permanent solution to replace the temporary security measures currently installed around the courthouse. In the years since those temporary measures were installed, several new developments have been completed in the Carlisle neighborhood, in particular near the courthouse, bringing new residents, employees, and visitors to the area. The increased number of people in Carlisle highlights the need for a connected network of streets and sidewalks within this developing urban neighborhood. The proposed plan provides a more suitable solution that allows for normal pedestrian and vehicular circulation, similar to the original plan for Carlisle. We appreciate GSA's willingness to find a solution that meets the security needs of the courthouse while furthering the city's goals to promote walkable and urban neighborhoods. As Mr. Hart noted, you have received letters of support from the Mayor of Alexandria and the Carlisle Design Review Board. In particular, I'd like to note that the Design Review Board members, who are responsible for the design review in Carlisle for over the last 20 years, were especially pleased with the solution, and at their meeting in March, they commended the GSA for developing an attractive plan that fit within Carlisle. Overall, the city is very pleased with the proposed project, and we look forward to seeing it successfully implemented, and we hope that the National Capital Planning Commission will approve this project. I'm happy to answer any questions from the city's point of view if you have any.
Thank you very much. Questions to the city? Thank you, Ms. North. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Are there further comments or discussion items on this particular EDR? You have the EDR before you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded that the EDR be approved. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's approved.
Before we move on, I just want to, I don't usually indulge in this kind of thing, but this was a atypically difficult project internally to get through, and I want to acknowledge too the work of Jalencia Millwood, who was trying to get this thing done for a long time and persevered.
Thank you. I know this was a difficult project. I believe it's got about 6 years worth of history to it, so it's quite a project. Thank you. The next agenda item the second and last action item we have. Agenda item 5B is the National Museum of the U.S. Army, North Post at Fort Belvoir, and we have Ms. Kelly.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Before you today are the final building plans for the National Museum of the United States Army. I would like to note that this is just final building plans. The Army had originally submitted final site plans, but through conversations with staff, has determined to remove the site plans from your consideration at this time. This will allow for additional coordination, as well as for the site plans for the museum to be submitted with the final site plans for the golf course reconfiguration project, which is a project resulting from the museum's location. NCPC normally reviews site plans and building plans together. However, elements can move forward separately if there are no concerns with those elements. An example of this is the recent actions of the Commission regarding the National Museum of African American History and Culture. The Commission has seen the concept and preliminary designs for the museum. The building plans are mainly the same as when the Commission approved them at preliminary design. Approval of the final building plans at this time will allow the Army to move forward with the construction drawings for the museum. The museum is proposed to be located on the north post of Fort Belvoir, just off of Fairfax County Parkway and John J. Kingman Road. Here you can see the existing site conditions for the site. It's currently improved with 5 golf links for the North Post Golf Course. The site is mainly a plateau, and the golf links are developed on top of the flat section of the plateau, and this is where most of the museum development will also occur. Surrounding the site on the west is residential area that is off of Fort Belvoir. To the south is Fairfax County Parkway, for which the museum project will be accessed from. And to the south of that, off of the slide, is the Army's airfield, which restricts height on the museum site. To the north and northeast is the remainder of the North Post Golf Course. To the east, between the site and John J. Kingman Road, is a wildlife corridor. And then across the street is the Defense Logistics Agency. As I indicated before, the Commission has reviewed both the concept and the preliminary designs. You can see here the progression of the design between the two periods. And note that the building has always been located in the southern section of the site. The building has changed orientation slightly to the northeast between the concept design and the preliminary design, and that orientation is carried through to the final site plans, or final building plans. So the location and the building orientation has not changed since preliminary design. And you can also note that the major elements of the preliminary design, such as the access road and the parking, have not changed as well since preliminary design. Here you can see how the building massing has changed through concept design to final design. The building will be comprised of 5 pavilions with a central tower pavilion element that's approximately 100 feet tall. So the building will be 4 levels with a basement level, and this has not changed from preliminary design to final design. So the heights of all the pavilions have remained the same. The biggest change was between concept design and preliminary design when the building lost a level due to the height restrictions. The building will be constructed of stainless steel metal panels and glass panels. This has been the design palette since concept design. The Army has refined the facade of the building and has introduced metal panels in the tower pavilion, which you see here. Staff reviewed the building plans against the Commission's comments received at the concept design, which was at July of 2010, as well as the comments provided at the preliminary approval in July of 2011. At concept, the Commission requested additional visual analysis of the building from Fairfax County Parkway, and I will show those views in the next couple of slides. At the preliminary design, the Commission approved the building with no comments and provided comments regarding the site plan, which I will briefly discuss in a bit. Here you can see the visual analysis from eastbound. So if you're traveling down Fairfax County Parkway in this location, what you would see of the building. The visual analysis states that the tree line will block views of the building from Fairfax County Parkway. The tower element may be visible during certain times of the year, however, it will be very minimal. Here you can see the view from westbound off of Fairfax County Parkway, and you can see that the building will be completely blocked by the existing conditions, the existing tree line conditions. The Commission had requested these viewshed analysis in order to determine the impact on the views of Fairfax County Parkway, and the visual analysis concludes that the impacts will be minimal. Here you can see the comments provided by the Commission at preliminary. It was regarding the site elements. They were the restoration of Swank Road, as well as to provide a focal point at the end of the drive aisle. I'd add additional landscaping between the access road and the building, as well as to provide pedestrian amenities along the walkway. As I indicated before, the Army had submitted the final site plans with the final building plans. After review, staff expressed concern to the Army regarding landscaping and tree replacement, particularly in this location between the building and the access road. I would like to note that approval of the final building at this time would not preclude the Army from meeting the recommendations by the Commission at preliminary design. Staff also expressed concern or expressed a desire for the Commission to review the final site plans with the final site plans for the golf course reconfiguration project. The Army proposes to retain 36 holes of golf play at Fort Belvoir and will need to establish new holes. Of what we've seen of the golf course, 2 new holes will go in this location, a new hole will be here, and 2 new holes will be in this location. Staff felt it would be beneficial if the Commission could review both site plans at the same time. With that, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approve the final building plans for the National Museum of the United States Army on the north post of Fort Belvoir. Notes that the Army intends to submit the final plans for the museum in tandem with the golf course reconfiguration project, and request that prior to submission of the final plans, the golf course reconfiguration project, the Army continue to coordinate with NCPC regarding tree replacement, landscape treatments, and pedestrian amenities. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Are there questions for Ms. Kelly?
Mr. Chairman.
Looking for a free golf pass, aren't you?
Well, I already got memberships. But the 2 holes that it looks like you have 2 par 3s and 1 par 4 hole there. I want to know whether it changed in terms of the number. Does it change that part of the golf course configuration?
No, it leaves the difficulty that is out there today.
It was too difficult. I want to reduce the difficulty. But no, I understand. Thank you. I won't pursue it. But I just noticed that they're going to replace those with the similar par holes.
Correct.
So my colleagues, my golfing buddies may want to know what's going on. I may have a lot of explaining to do probably in the end, but I won't leave. I'll leave that. I'll take care of that. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Kelly? Well, the EDR is before you. Is there a motion on the EDR? It's been moved and, I'm sorry? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as presented, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to abstain at the moment.
And the EDR is approved. Thank you. The last item on our agenda, I think it's the last item, is 6A, and it's an information presentation on the Southwest Eco District Initiative. The Southwest Eco District certainly precedes my going on 2 years here, and it's an initiative that I've been involved in since my time, and GSA and others certainly longer, Harriet much longer. And of the many things we have going on here at NCPC, I find this to be one of the most extraordinary initiatives that we have underway. And so I'm very pleased that we as a commission are receiving this this overview today. Ms. Miller.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm Elizabeth Miller, for those of you that don't know me. I'm the project manager for the Southwest Eco District Initiative. And I will say I'm working with a great team here at NCPC. This project is a product of many minds. The purpose of this informational presentation is to brief the Commission on the status of the project and give you some background on the work that we're doing. So today's briefing is going to provide you with this background information in preparation for a full presentation, public presentation that we've got scheduled for the July Public Commission meeting. And at that meeting, we're going to request directive. We're going to have you review it and ask for directive to approve it for release for public review and comment. And we'll be then entering into about a 60-day public and review comment period. So after introducing the concept of an eco-district and a little bit about the project, I'm going to focus my presentation primarily on why now is the time to act, how we can achieve a highly sustainable mixed-use community, how district-scale strategies can be more effective and yield greater results, and why an eco-district makes economic sense, and where partnerships can actually help make this happen. So a question that we often get is, what is an eco-district? So it's a relatively new term, at least on this side of the ocean. It's more probably commonly used in Europe, but it is finding its way into our toolbox. And eco-districts can take on many different definitions, but there is a common thread, and that's that they differ from traditional planning methods because they plan beyond buildings and blocks to the scale of a district. And this approach can yield greater results than planning building by building or block by block. And by planning at this district scale, we can create these great places to live and work, mixed-use communities. We can reconnect with nature. And well, what we're finding is that it's a prudent use of our financial and natural resources. So the purpose of the Southwest Eco District, as we're defining it, is to capture and manage and reuse the energy, water, and waste beyond single buildings to a group of buildings within this defined area. It includes transportation choices and a mix of uses within a given neighborhood. And it also creates a neighborhood of connected parks, plazas, and open spaces that we believe will make for a great, vibrant, green, and walkable community. So there's a couple of directives that are the foundation of this work. And one is the Monumental Core Framework Plan, which was adopted by this commission in 2009, and was also by Commission of Fine Arts. Also adopted the plan. And the primary premise, or actually the Monumental Core Framework Plan called out the Southwest Rectangle, which is this entire area here just south of the mall, as its cornerstone strategy. And what it really tried to do, four main things. It was to redefine 10th Street as a vibrant mixed-use corridor, reestablish Maryland Avenue as a grand boulevard, establish Banneker Park as the next great cultural destination in the city, as well as repair the urban fabric here, which is to reconnect the street grid. So the Southwest Eco District really drills down to the next level of planning within this area and starts to really look, is this feasible? Can we feasibly realize this vision? Another very important and primary driver is Executive Order 13514, Federal Leadership in Environmental, Energy, and Economic Performance. This was signed by President Obama in 2009. This executive order represents really a transformative shift in how the federal government operates by requiring agencies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's the first time that this metric is actually being used to track the progress in sustainability. So this is our study area. Again, it's south of the National Mall. The Smithsonian Castle is here, right here, between Independence and Main Avenue, 4th to the east, and 12th to the west. And the boundary does kind of meander along the eastern edge. It's about 110 acres. It's primarily a single-use district. There's about 10 million square feet of office, either primarily owned or leased by the federal government. There is one hotel that sits here, and there's a little bit of retail and food service, most of which is buried either under this plaza or within some of the buildings near the metro station. So the question is, why here and why now? Then, as many of you know, that this area is really on the cusp of change. There's billions of dollars that are being invested. I know you're familiar with the Southwest Waterfront or the Wharf Project. That project's getting ready to break ground in the near future. The owners of LaFont Plaza are also investing a great deal of money in renovating as well as expanding their facilities. And we're happy to say that new museums are now considering this area for development. And as important, the federal government is also re-examining its property on how we can meet aggressive sustainability goals, work to create a better workplace for a modern workforce, so improve space efficiency within our federal buildings, as well as seeking ways to reduce our operating cost. So we actually kicked off the core part of this work in January of 2011 with the Southwest Eco District Task Force, as well as a technical working group. This task force is represented by 17 agencies, and on that task force, NCPC, GSA, the Park Service, and the city, which also sit on this commission, serve on the task force, but it also includes all of the other federal tenants in and near the Eco District, as well as several other city agencies. So the Eco District Plan is really the result of 2 collaborative planning efforts, and as well as a cooperative funding partnership, which really enabled us to do this work. NCPC staff led the work of the task force with input from the public and stakeholders, and our work focused on the 110 acres, and we focused on urban development, transportation, and environmental strategies. And this work was funded by NCPC, generous support with GSA, Commission of Fine Arts, and even the Department of Agriculture. DCOP prepared the Maryland Avenue Plan, which essentially is this corridor here. It's called the Maryland Avenue Small Area Plan, with input from the public as well as an advisory committee made up of private property owners that exist along this avenue, or what is going to become an avenue. This plan focused on how to deck the avenue as well as land use and public space issues along this corridor, and DCO, the Office of Planning, funded this project. And the Office of Planning has actually completed this work. They've submitted the small area plan to the mayor, to the council actually, with a legislative package. They're waiting for a council hearing to be scheduled, which we think will be within the next 30 to 60 days.
I think a tentative date has been scheduled by the council, June 6th.
Great. Thank you. So very early on in our process, the task force set forth a mission on how to reach the overarching project goals for 10th Street and Maryland Avenue, and that this area can become an eco-district of well-connected places to commemorate, visit, live, and work, but it also serves as a high-performance environmental showcase at a district scale, and that highlights how we can practice and meet our sustainability requirements at that district level. So we're in the works of literally starting to wrap up the draft report now. And this plan lays out the vision, the strategies, as well as the development scenario and the implementation framework that will help us to coordinate improvements to meet our goals and targets, as well as to optimize the use of financial and natural resources. And I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of giving you an overview of that, of what's included in our recommendations. So how do we achieve a highly successful mixed-use community? Essentially, we've set up a sustainability framework that will help guide future decisions. And as I go through this, I'm going to touch upon some of the kind of ancillary studies that really were important in informing this work. The Office of Planning prepared a market study and also conducted an on-site survey. And this was very important to help us figure out what is a good land use mix for this area and what might be make this a successful place. The plan also includes land use and active street strategies, which address where and how to provide for a healthy mix of uses, as well as how we can increase the street life within this area. It also includes a civic realm component that addresses the placement, configuration, and treatment, and the relationship between public spaces and civic buildings. We also conducted 2 different transportation studies. The first actually assessed the physical, vertical, and horizontal connections that would be necessary to connect the street grid, and if we could actually meet the required grades and clearances to allow that to happen. The second tested our development scenario that I'm going to be summarizing for you today, so that we could understand the impact that the new density and mix of land uses would actually have both on the roadways as well as the transit network. And so these studies were very important in helping us to put together our transportation framework. And that includes a street grid as well as a number of transit and transportation strategies. We've also developed some guidelines on how we could actually establish different characters for these streets, particularly since we're looking to put a number of streets back in place. And we also worked very closely with the General Services Administration, and I will also say the private property owners, to assess the energy and water use of these existing buildings within the study area. We identified potential energy and water strategies, we modeled buildings, we modeled these strategies, and tested potential solutions. And basically by creating some mammoth spreadsheets, doing a lot of very complex math, and relying upon the extensive experience of our consultant team, they were able to advise us on what we believe to be the appropriate energy and water strategies that are going to help us meet our targets. So we've identified building, block, and district scale strategies and recommendations on not only how we can conserve water and energy resources, but how we can maximize the use of renewable energy within this area. And what we found is that even by lightly or fully rehabilitating the existing building stock, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. However, it's not until we start talking about renewable forms of energy that we achieve a greater reduction in those greenhouse gas emissions. So some of the strategies that we're looking at include investing in the central utility plant, which is located here, also employing some sewer mining strategies, using geothermal or ground source heat, as well as solar energy to help to reduce the use of energy from the grid. We also looked at a number of water strategies, and both at the building and district scale. These strategies will help us to conserve potable water and practically eliminate all of the stormwater runoff from this area. It's highly an impervious area, so that's quite an accomplishment. The plan also includes waste and urban ecology strategies as well. So through this work, we've learned that really planning at a district scale is needed if we really want to make our city more sustainable. And that if we want to create the kinds of places that will, a kind of a neighborhood that's going to connect the mall to the waterfront. So groupings of well-designed and efficient buildings will only get us so far. So to really make a difference, we need to really plan the entire precinct and plan it as a unit so that we can achieve these greater sustainability goals and to ensure that we get a healthy land use mix for a great community. I'm going to summarize the draft plan's proposed building approach to rehabilitating, infilling, and redeveloping this area that will help us to achieve the targets that I'm going to review with you in a few minutes. So this is a diagram of the existing conditions. Shows the existing buildings, and just for orientation, most of you know, this is Department of Energy, Banneker. This is the General Services Administration Regional Office Building. So the first step is to actually lightly or fully rehab these buildings. So that's what these colors represent. These are federal buildings that we would go in and do some rehabilitation work to bring down the energy use. But again, it's not until we go further can we really achieve the kind of targets that we'd like to achieve. The purple color here indicates those buildings where we're proposing potentially repurposing them. So what does repurposing mean? Repurposing means fully rehabilitating them, potentially building them out to their full buildable envelope or developing them out to their full buildable envelope, as well as potentially changing their use. And so these uses could change to potentially residential, cultural, or maybe even a mixed-use office development. These blue buildings, the light sky blue buildings that popped in here in this location north of Maryland Avenue and down at the overlook are the infill development opportunities. And these infill opportunities we would expect to either be cultural development or private residential or office and retail development. And it's really when we start looking at infill development that we can really start to reconnect the grid and start to achieve some of our, start to reconnect that street grid and improve mobility within the area. And finally, the green represents redevelopment. So this is the Forest complex here and the decking over the southeast-southwest freeway. And it's really these moves that become transformative and catalytic for this area. When not only can it allows us to, again, increase our mix of use, it also allows us to retain the Department of Energy in a federal headquarters, and really start to reconnect the grid to realize full mobility within this area. This image actually represents focus areas, and basically what we've done is we've kind of packaged or grouped these different precincts or different sub-areas within the eco-district to help us organize detailed strategies, as well as it starts to help us organize how we can put together an action plan and actually start to formulate manageable projects. So we're going to be going over this with you in more detail at the July meeting, but we just kind of wanted to introduce that idea today so you could see how we're starting to organize our thoughts here. So this is the Independence Quarter, which is north of Maryland Avenue. We're also looking at the 10th Street Quarter and Banneker Park as a unit. Maryland Avenue, which includes Reservation 113, as well as the VRE station, which we're referring to the LaFont station, and of course the decking over the southeast-southwest freeway. So why district scale strategies are more effective? So before I talk about implementation, what I'd like to do is to summarize the results that we actually get. And this is really, I think, the most exciting part. So these are this is actually what we believe we can achieve here by employing these various recommendations. We're able to retain 7.9 million square feet of federal office space. That's pretty much the same amount of square footage. That's the same amount of federal office space that's there now. And by making that space more efficient, we can actually accommodate up to 19,000 more employees. We can create an additional 2.8 million square feet of new development that could be private office, potentially residential, and could also be used for federal purposes. We can accommodate 1.2 million square feet of cultural facilities, and that would allow us to develop anywhere from 3 to 5 museums. We can even accommodate another 3 to 4 memorial sites. We can create up to 8.8 acres of new improved, I shouldn't say it's not all new land, but basically new and improved parks and plazas. We can reconnect the street grid and create 8 new intersections in this area here. And we can improve and expand the intermodal connectivity. And this also has the potential to really help the regional transit capacity as well. And last but not least, we can really establish these grand connections from the National Mall to the waterfront, from the U.S. Capitol, down Maryland Avenue, and ultimately to the waterfront. And on the environmental side, our draft plan shows how these district scale strategies can not only save us money, but yield greater results than planning at the scale of an individual building. We're able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 51%. And as I mentioned earlier, we can capture and reuse all of the rainwater that falls within this precinct. We can reduce our potable water use up to 70%, and we can increase the amount of waste we divert from the landfill from 35% to 80%. And it also gives us the opportunity to transform the federally owned central utility plant into a highly efficient and financially successful energy model. So why do these things make sense? We actually had HRNA, a consulting firm, come in and with the help of our consultants at ZGF, put together a cost estimate and really look at the cost and benefits here. So we performed a very high-level economic analysis, and our preliminary findings actually show that with these recommendations, that the benefits will outweigh the cost. And a little bit about how that will actually happen. So while the cost of so the big lift here is really improving the utility infrastructure for energy and water. And so while upgrading the utility infrastructure cost will probably exceed how we will lower our operating cost, where the scale really starts to tip towards benefits outweighing cost is when we factor in several other important factors. That is the increased value of denser development and improved connectivity and public space within this area. Both the savings and revenues from federal land, from the use of federal land and facilities, and using this land and facilities more efficiently, as well as disposing of excess land for private development. And then the benefits are even greater when we factor in the intrinsic environmental and social values that are more difficult to assign a dollar value to, such as a cleaner air, cleaner river, and those types of things. Employment and jobs, which actually do translate into hard numbers. So before this really brings us to implementation. So many of the recommendations that we're going to be talking to you about in July can translate into projects that would benefit one or more stakeholders. And the plan we're going to be presenting will identify these projects that can be carried out over time. And these projects can be carried out as they become economically viable, as perhaps federal or local priorities and funding requirements justify that, or by leveraging federal, public, and local dollars. The plan will also outline the funding and legislative tools and the partnerships that are going to be required to implement these recommendations and the district-wide improvements that are going to benefit these multiple property owners. And in many cases, the federal government, the city, and the private sector has the existing authorities and potentially the funding mechanisms to independently move some of these projects forward. However, there are certain projects that are going to take public-private partnerships between any 2 or 3 of those entities, and those entities being federal, local, or private sector. So we've identified 3 areas where we believe enhanced coordination is going to be needed, and that's where this kind of a public-private partnership between the federal, local government, and private sector. And that's in managing and paying for the district-wide infrastructure projects, and that essentially is the energy and water systems as well as the roads, coordinating the multiple modes of transportation activity at LaFont Station, and making that a more robust intermodal center. And third, coordinating the development activity to ensure that the larger goals of both the local and federal government can be achieved here. So we've been looking at a variety of mechanisms by which to make this happen. And it is going to require formal interagency agreements between the governments and even potentially special legislation that would be very specific just to the construction and management and operation of these improvements within the eco-district. So I've given you a kind of a high-level, broad overview of where we've been and kind of where we're headed and the results that we believe that we're able to achieve by employing the strategies that are contained in the draft plan. We look forward to presenting these details to you in July, or actually you'll be able to see them in the draft plan, and we'll sum those up with you in July. And our schedule to actually get there is to send the draft report to the task force review and comment by the end of May. And then around the middle of June, we'll compile those comments, update the plan, and then send that out to the commission. You'll have a few weeks with that report before the July 12th meeting, at which time, once again, we'll ask for that to be released for public review and comment. We'd like to do at least a 60-day review period, and then that would put us on track to go back to the task force, hopefully with a final plan in October, November, and be back before this commission towards the end of the year or very early in 2013. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
very exciting project, and a lot of work over years has gone into this. Questions or comments? Mr. Hart.
As I recall, one of the objectives was to try and implement a number of energy-saving strategies, I think aimed towards a net energy budget of 0. How close are you to that target?
Well, by fully employing the recommendations of, involving all of the energy, renewable energy strategies that I mentioned, as well as doing the rehabilitation work that I also mentioned, we can reduce that down to 51. We can reduce those gas emissions to 51%. That doesn't get us to 0. And I'm going to have our expert at this, who's Diane Sullivan, who's actually speaking at a conference today, provide you with more detail. But the best to my knowledge, in order to get down to that 0 point, we actually would have to do some carbon trading, carbon purchase, which is a whole nother policy issue. But we can get very close. I mean, we can not get close. We can get significantly reduce our impact and our footprint by doing some of these things.
I have a comment and a question. First, it was a great presentation, and I love the graphics, and from just the man on the street perspective on this, to show those cutaways that show what's underneath the street and how you're trying to combine those, I think it has a great impact. And I'm curious, there's a couple of sections where it talks about the importance of the connection to the river, but that portion of the riverfront is not included in the plan. So I'm just curious, not knowing the background, why that wasn't called out so much more explicitly to include it. I'm sure you have great reasons, but I'm really curious about that.
I think in the report you'll probably find that'll be a little clearer. And a lot of times we don't show it on our graphics here because it is adjacent to, it makes it look as if it's part of our proposal. But I'd be happy to actually share those plans with you. And we've worked very closely with the waterfront developers and with the city to make sure that there is a good connection, both a visual connection and a physical connection.
Yeah, and that's clear. So I was just curious when you drew the original boundaries for your eco-district plan, why it wasn't included. But
primarily because of we were the federal land. I mean, essentially, we only have jurisdiction over the federal properties. And even though within our boundary it includes private property, it's primarily a federal precinct. That's essentially.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
As you know, I do love this project also, and appreciate all the work that you and the NCPC staff have done on this, and and think it represents a great vision. I would wish that times were not so austere, and I'm just trying to imagine a scenario besides all of us just continuing to buy lottery tickets and pledging them to this project, where we would get the funds to be able to invest in something like this. I think it could be a wonderful national demonstration. I bet there are opportunities in every city where there are federal lands and a combination of buildings where you could really demonstrate how you could make an investment that would have multiple benefits, and every piece of it would at every scale would be able to show savings and health and environmental and other benefits. But I'm trying to figure out if there would ever be a moment where we could make such a proposal to do this kind of a demonstration project. We are in an era where there is more combined federal funding, and this is a project that has energy benefits and transportation benefits and federal building benefits, and those are not all the pockets that have shared funds in the past, or agencies that have, but could be. I don't know, I'm just wondering if that is something that we might want to try to develop as a proposal, if not to use for the 2014 budget, to kind of have in our hip pocket if something should become available where such a demonstration would be called for. I mean, if it was, if it was era again, and we had gotten this project further along, it's conceivable that it could have been eligible for some kind of funding. So anyway, that's. I'd be interested in seeing if any of my colleagues on the federal side have any insight or suggestions about this. But I do think it's by design and certainly by as you've demonstrated, Elizabeth, this is a project that really has tremendous multiple benefits. It's just hard to get the beneficiaries to necessarily front the dollars that they would have to front in order to receive those benefits.
We're going to keep working on this. Yeah.
You ask those "where's the money" questions, and nobody has those answers.
I mean, I guess one thing that would be important to note is that we are continuing, even though we're moving forward with the plan as a draft plan and with these recommendations, we do know that we need to drill down a little bit further to understand how the costs and benefits affect the various stakeholders, and we are right now looking into how we can actually accomplish that. So giving us a little bit more, another level of information that's going to really help be able to strategically look at how we do go after those kinds of funds.
Mr. Chairman, for news flash, I heard that there's a piece of legislation being introduced in the Congress and the Senate. 2 representatives are here to fund this entire project. Since it's so consistent with everything, all the rhetoric that's in the street on both sides. I want to commend you, Elizabeth, for, again, a great presentation and the staff work. It's exciting. Well, it's hard for me to get excited about a lot of things these days, but I am excited about this. And I think our planning officers already knows the problem is cash, as I call cream. Cash rules every action. So thank you for your presentation. Keep up the good work.
Thank
and
you.
I hope there will be a lot of residential integrated into this mixed use, because I find historically, over long history, that when you can get people living in places, they find ways to get money. You never know who might move into one of those buildings, who can push some people and buttons up on the hill and all over the world to get money to come in. So getting people involved rather than just businesses who have bottom lines, people who have lives tend to be a little bit more committed, particularly when they buy in.
I will let you know that 2.8 million additional square feet includes anywhere between 1,500 to 1,800-ish residential dwelling units. And that's really critical to making this work as an eco-district and helping to get the biggest bang for our buck. Okay.
Hearing no other comments, it's one of the shorter meetings. It's an hour and a quarter that we've met today. So hearing nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.